Maplewood, Ohio, was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked, trusted their neighbors, and waved to each other from porches. Nestled among maple trees and picket fences was a small white house with green shutters and a perfectly trimmed lawn. It belonged to Angela Larkson, a woman well known for her homemade pies, generous smile, and the most beautiful rose garden in town. Every spring, her yard exploded with color, deep reds, soft pinks, and creamy whites, all standing tall in perfect rows. She won Best Garden 3 years in a row at the county fair, and people often stopped to ask her what her secret was. She would laugh and say, "Love and patience." Her husband, Victor Larkson, was a quieter figure in town. A retired accountant, he was the opposite of Angela's bubbly personality, reserved, methodical, and private. He rarely attended community events, preferring to spend his time indoors reading or working on puzzles. Neighbors described him as polite but distant. He'd give a nod if you passed him on the street, but small talk wasn't his strength. Still, no one suspected any trouble between them. They seemed like an ordinary couple who had settled into a peaceful, if somewhat uneventful, retirement. That peace shattered one November morning. Angela appeared at the local police station, her eyes red, holding a steaming mug of coffee between her shaking hands. She reported that Victor hadn't come home the night before. According to her, he'd gone out for his usual evening walk around 8 p.m. and never returned. Officers took down her statement, asked a few routine questions, and opened a missing person file. There were no immediate signs of foul play. The house was tidy. Victor's wallet and keys were still on the kitchen counter. His favorite walking shoes were missing, suggesting he had indeed gone out as Angela said. Local volunteers and police launched a search of the nearby park and wooded areas. Drones were deployed. Dogs were brought in. But after 2 days, nothing had turned up. No footprints, no surveillance footage, no witnesses. Victor Larkson had simply vanished. The community was stunned. Candlelight vigils were held. Social media lit up with support and speculation. Angela gave a few interviews, always composed but emotional, asking the public to keep looking. She thanked the police and the neighbors and promised to keep hope alive. She even kept his favorite chair by the fireplace untouched, as if he might walk through the door at any moment. But something didn't sit right with the officers on the case. There was a strange stillness in the home, a quiet too sharp. And then there was Angela herself. Her story never changed, not even slightly. While that could be seen as consistency, detectives knew that real grief often came with confusion, disjointed memories, and slips of truth. Angela, somehow, seemed too prepared. Too perfect. As if she had rehearsed the story one too many times. The question was, why? No one could guess the answer. Not yet. The days turned into weeks, and still there was no trace of Victor Larkson. Flyers with his photo hung on telephone poles, slowly fading and curling at the corners as the cold wind of December swept through Maplewood. The community's initial concern began to shift into quiet resignation. People assumed the worst but didn't speak of it out loud. Some thought perhaps Victor had suffered a stroke or heart attack and wandered off. Others believed he had taken his own life, a quiet end for a quiet man. Angela remained at the center of attention, always dressed neatly, always gracious. She thanked everyone who came by with casseroles or condolences, and she kept up with her garden as if nothing had changed. Even in the early frost, she was out there every morning, watering and pruning. That's when the complaints began. A couple on the next street noticed a foul smell that seemed to drift through the air whenever the wind blew from a certain direction. At first, it was dismissed as a broken sewer line or perhaps a dead animal nearby. But the odor persisted and grew worse, especially near Angela's backyard. It was subtle, yet unmistakable. The neighbor's dog refused to go near the fence that bordered Angela's property. The local sanitation department was called out but found nothing unusual. Still, the reports were noted. Then came the tip from the hardware store. A clerk, flipping through recent transactions, recalled a peculiar visit from Angela a few days before Victor's disappearance. She had purchased several large bags of lime, a heavy-duty tarp, duct tape, a new shovel, and a large roll of plastic sheeting. When asked what it was all for, she'd laughed lightly and said she was redoing the garden. It had struck the clerk as odd, but at the time, harmless. After all, she was known for her gardening obsession. But with Victor missing, and the strange smell reported, that receipt suddenly looked very different to investigators. Detectives returned to Angela's home, this time with more pointed questions. She remained calm and polite, answering everything with poise. She explained the purchases, saying she was trying a new soil treatment method. She even offered them coffee. But there was an unease beneath the surface, something just slightly off. When asked if they could take a look around the yard, she hesitated, only for a second, but long enough. She said the ground was fragile due to her winter preparations and that she'd prefer they didn't step on her roses. That hesitation gave them cause to seek a warrant. Within 2 days, it was approved. Officers arrived early one morning with shovels and forensic teams. Angela stood by silently as they sectioned off the garden and began to dig. The soil was loose, freshly turned despite the season. It didn't take long. Less than 3 feet down, wrapped in thick plastic and surrounded by lime, was the unmistakable outline of a human body. The search for Victor Larkson was over. The truth had been blooming right under everyone's nose. The discovery of Victor Larkson's body shocked Maplewood to its core. News vans lined the quiet street, their bright lights cutting through the early morning fog as reporters scrambled to cover the unfolding story. The image of the town's beloved gardener standing silently in handcuffs beside her blooming rose bushes quickly spread across national headlines. Angela was taken into custody without resistance, her expression unreadable. Inside her home, investigators began a meticulous search for anything that could explain what had led to this quiet man's brutal end. In the living room, they found Victor's reading glasses resting on the side table next to an untouched puzzle book. His slippers were still by the fireplace, just as Angela had kept them. Upstairs in a locked drawer of her writing desk, officers uncovered a series of handwritten notes, lists, and web printouts. The contents painted a chilling picture. Internet searches dated back several months with phrases like, "How to hide a body," "How long does it take to decompose," and "Life insurance payout if spouse dies." Some of the searches had been deleted, but they were recovered by digital forensics without much difficulty. Even more incriminating was the discovery of a recently updated life insurance policy in Victor's name. The beneficiary had been changed from a joint arrangement with Victor's brother to solely Angela, just weeks before his disappearance. The amount? $500,000. Investigators also found evidence that Angela had contacted the insurance company twice to ask how soon a claim could be processed if a body wasn't found. Her reason at the time was vague and phrased as, "just in case." As the forensic team examined Victor's remains, the cause of death became clear: blunt force trauma to the back of the skull. There were no signs of a struggle. It was likely he never saw the attack coming. From the angle and depth of the injury, investigators believed he was sitting or kneeling when it happened. He had been wrapped quickly, buried under soil treated with lime to speed decomposition, and covered with fresh rose bushes to conceal the disturbed earth. It was no longer a missing person case. It was murder. Angela remained silent through most of the initial questioning. She asked for a lawyer and kept her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her calm demeanor unsettled the officers in the room. There were no tears, no denials, no visible signs of remorse. Just the occasional polite smile, as if she were sitting at a dinner party rather than under suspicion of killing her husband. Behind the scenes, detectives began piecing together a fuller picture of her life. Angela had no criminal record, no known history of violence. But as they dug deeper, they found inconsistencies in her past. Gaps in her history. A trail of aliases, former addresses, and whispers of previous relationships that ended. Something didn't add up. Angela Larkson wasn't just a grieving wife. She was a puzzle, and the deeper they looked, the darker the image became. As investigators peeled back the layers of Angela Larkson's life, a disturbing pattern began to emerge. Publicly, she had always appeared composed and traditional: Sunday church, library fundraisers, garden club meetings, but behind that image was a woman who had changed identities more than once and moved across several states over the past 2 decades. Using old property records, archived marriage licenses, and Social Security data, authorities connected Angela to 2 previous names, Angela Maynard and Angela Whitlow. Under each name, there had been a husband. Under each name, there had also been tragedy. Her first known husband, Douglas Maynard, died nearly 20 years ago in Michigan. The official report described a boating accident during a weekend fishing trip. His body was never recovered, but the lake was deep and the current strong. Angela told the police that Douglas had gone out alone and never returned. At the time, she had appeared genuinely devastated. A small memorial was held. The case was closed, ruled accidental. She collected a modest insurance payout and moved away 6 months later. No one thought to look deeper. 7 years after that, she resurfaced in Illinois as Angela Whitlow and married a man named Peter Whitlow, a retired schoolteacher. They lived in a rented farmhouse outside a small town. 2 years later, Peter was hospitalized after a fall down the basement stairs. He died from his injuries days later. The incident was ruled an accident. Once again, Angela collected a life insurance payment. No charges were filed. Shortly after Peter's funeral, she moved again, this time to Ohio, under the name Angela Larkson. And not long after settling in Maplewood, she met Victor. Armed with this new information, detectives reopened both prior cases. In Michigan, they requested the original incident file. In Illinois, they questioned the responding officers from the Stair Fall case. While no conclusive evidence of foul play had been found at the time, the similar circumstances, especially the insurance payouts and Angela's sudden departures, were impossible to ignore. Though the statute of limitations had passed on some aspects, the pattern added crucial weight to the prosecution's case in Victor's murder. Meanwhile, financial records showed Angela had been planning her next move. She had recently withdrawn a large portion of her savings and had begun corresponding with a man in Florida through a private email account under an alias. In those messages, she hinted at being free soon and spoke of starting over again, clean. The emails were flirtatious, but also strategic. She was already planning a future without Victor before he went missing. At trial, prosecutors painted her as methodical, manipulative, and entirely unremorseful. They called her a predator in plain sight, a woman who smiled sweetly while plotting deaths for profit. The pattern was clear, the evidence overwhelming. Her past, once buried as carefully as her latest victim, had finally caught up with her. The quiet widow image was gone. In its place stood a woman whose life was built on secrets, lies, and the silent graves of the men who trusted her. Angela Larkson's trial began 6 months after Victor's body was found, and by then, public interest had exploded. True crime forums, morning talk shows, and even national news channels followed the case closely. The courtroom was packed each day, not just with reporters but with Maplewood residents who once called her a friend. Many had stood beside her at bake sales and admired her rose garden without ever suspecting that something so horrific had been hiding beneath the surface. The prosecution presented a meticulous timeline, supported by digital records, receipts, and forensic evidence. The motive was clear: financial gain. They detailed how Angela had updated Victor's life insurance policy, researched body disposal methods, and made incriminating purchases just days before his disappearance. The fact that she had buried him in the garden she so proudly displayed was emphasized as both chilling and calculated, concealing the crime in plain sight. Witnesses testified about the strange smell in the backyard, her reluctance to allow searches, and her detached behavior after reporting Victor missing. But the most damning testimony came from a forensic pathologist, who explained how Victor had likely been struck from behind while kneeling or sitting, possibly reading or working in the garden. There were no defensive wounds, no signs of a struggle. He never saw it coming. The image was haunting, an unsuspecting man killed quietly, quickly, and buried by the woman he trusted most. Angela's defense team argued diminished mental capacity and claimed she had suffered from long-term trauma that led to dissociative episodes. They suggested that she acted out of panic, not premeditation. They painted a picture of a lonely woman overwhelmed by stress and emotional instability. But the jury was unconvinced. The calm, deliberate planning betrayed any claims of confusion or impulse. The emails to her Florida acquaintance, the insurance changes, and her emotionless demeanor were impossible to ignore. It took the jury less than a day to reach a verdict. Angela Larkson was found guilty of first-degree murder, insurance fraud, and obstruction of justice. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the sentence was read aloud, Angela remained motionless, her hands folded neatly in front of her, just as they had been during every court session. She didn't cry. She didn't flinch. She simply nodded once, as if acknowledging the end of a story she had written herself. The house on Maple Avenue was seized and later sold at auction, but no one stayed long. The garden was torn out. The soil replaced. Still, rumors persisted. Some said the roses never bloomed again. Others swore they saw Angela sometimes, standing in the yard in their dreams, smiling with dirt on her gloves. Victor Larkson was finally laid to rest beside his parents in a quiet cemetery miles away from the place he called home. His grave remained simple, marked by a plaque that reads, "Loved. Missed. Never forgotten." Maplewood had returned to being a quiet town, but it would never forget the season when the roses bloomed over a grave, and everyone looked the other way.